All right, we'll get going in just a minute. Hey, Acid, how you doing? Hey, Metastep. No, yeah, you're number 2 this time. Um, okay, so I have a question I have to ask, and I don't like asking it. It was fun. But for my New Year's Eve stream, I'm looking at doing like money for shots. And I'm wondering, since I'm not monetized here, what's the best way y'all thinks to do that? I mean, I can obviously... Oh, hold on. I can hear myself. It's throwing me off. Obviously, people can donate directly on Rumble and I believe on Kick. Cash App. Okay, I'll have to look at that one. I know a lot of people use Ko-Fi. I need to make sure whatever it is I can I'll not be contributing to the destruction of your internal organs. My internal organs are fine. I don't drink that often, so it'll be fine. I take that back. I drink copious amounts of coffee. Ko-Fi, coffee. I don't know how they pronounce it. I say Ko-Fi, but maybe it's coffee. I don't know. Stream Elements. I think I already have one of those set up. I just have to get it out and working. PayPal. I like to make sure I keep everything in my business name for a variety of reasons. Oh no, wrong one. Finishing up my tweet here. There we go. Tweet is complete. That rhymes. No reason to do that. Why put it in my mother's name when I can reap the benefits of having it set up as a business? As I am not doing this well enough to make a profit, at least I can mark everything I do as a loss and not have to pay taxes on it, you know? And legally, by the way. No reason to give the government money if I don't gotta. You know? Alright, I really need to figure out some way to play music. So we'll just take a quick moment for looking at that. Oh. I might buy this. Not right now. I'm broke. And that is way too much money per month. Fuck that. Good idea, but I'm not paying that much money. Da, 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 da. Did I mention in the Gilded that I uploaded the rest of the songs? So, oh, really? No, you didn't mention that. Let's see here. Really? You have 3 whole playlists? Alright. Wanna... Oh, okay. So I get it. Oh. I guess this is free. Hold on. Hey, McCracken, how you doing tonight? I know you guys can't hear this. I have to... Oh, yeah, this is just an audio source, huh? Oh, well, I don't want you to hear just yet. Hey, Joshy, how you doing, man? Oh, I don't have that set up for... Here we are. So here I am. All right, next step is... I think I can just do this. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Damn it. Try that. Sing first. Not tonight. Not unless I'm drunk. Oh, did they go away? Where'd my jellyfish go? Oh, right, I forgot to loop it. Let's turn that down. All right, is that loud enough for you? Too loud? It's a little too sweet, honestly. Maybe I'll try this one instead. Oh. No. A little more synthy. We'll go with that. Hey, Rachel. Let me know how the background music is. I'm trying to get the sound adjusted. God, that's so poppy, though. I don't know. None of these are right. Maybe it's just the song, huh? Okay, I kind of like this one. Oh shit, I don't have that set up on the screen. Fuck. Hey Sleazy, as Sleazy said, did you remember to hit the like button, stroke the subscribe button, caress the bell, change to all for notifications, comment and share? I'd appreciate it. Alright. How's the music? I'm assuming, because I would like to get to reading here in a second. Damn, it's loud on my end. My ears! Oh, wait. I always forget there's another way to turn myself up and down. Too many buttons and shit. Alright. Alright, we're gonna get going. Oh yeah, there's buttons and sliders and shit all over the place over here. It's a regular mess. All right, let's get into this, my friends. We're probably not going to get through the whole story tonight. It's a pretty long one. But I figure we'll try to break it up into at least 2 parts, maybe more. Maybe I will get through it. We'll find out. I'm not committing either way, so. You would. Let's get going here. I really should remember how to do that. Hold on 1 second. That should be a thing I can put on here. Alright, we're gonna do something weird. Hold on 1 moment. I gotta figure out how I did it. There it is. Alright, that should do it. Alright. The Dunwich Horror. Gorgons and hydras and chimeras, dire stories of Solano and the Harpies, may reproduce themselves in the brain of superstition, but they were there before. They are transcripts, types. The archetypes are in us and eternal. How else should the recital of what we know in a waking sense to be false come to affect us at all? Is it that we naturally conceive terror from such objects considered in their capacity of being able to inflict upon us bodily injury? Oh, least of all. Those terrors are of older standing. They date beyond the body, or without the body. They would have been the same. That is the kind of fear here treated is purely the kind of fear here treated is purely spiritual. That it is strong in proportion as it is objectless on earth. That it predominates in the period of our sinless infancy. Our difficulties in the solution of which might afford some probable insight into our anti-mundane condition, and a peep, at least, into the shadowland of pre-existence. Charles Lamb, Witches and Other Night Fears. When a traveler in North Massachusetts takes the wrong fork at the junction of the Aylesbury Pike, just beyond Dean's Corner, he comes upon a lonely and curious country. The ground gets higher, and the briar-bordered stone walls press closer and closer against the ruts of the dusty, curving road. The trees of frequent forest belts seem too large, and the wild weeds, brambles, and grasses attain a luxuriance not often found in settled regions. At the same time, the planted fields appear singularly few and barren, while the sparsely scattered houses wear a surprisingly uniform aspect of age, squalor, and dilapidation. Where is that? Hold on. I'm getting distracted. I gotta do something. Okay, sorry. Where are we? Age, squalor, and dilapidation. Without knowing why, one hesitates to ask directions from the gnarled, solitary figures spied now and then on crumbling doorsteps or on the sloping rock-strewn meadows. Those figures are so silent and furtive that one feels somehow confronted by forbidden things with which it would be better to have nothing to do. When a rise in the road brings the mountains in view above the deep woods, the feeling of strange uneasiness is increased. The summits are too rounded and symmetrical to give a sense of comfort and naturalness, and sometimes the sky silhouettes with a special clearness the queer circles of tall stone pillars, which most of them are crowned. Gorges and ravines of problematic depth intersect the way, and the crude wooden bridges always seem of dubious safety. When the road dips again, there are stretches of marshlands that one instinctively dislikes, and indeed almost fears. At evening, when unseen whippoorwills chatter and the fireflies come out in abnormal profusion to dance to the raucous, creepily insistent rhythm of strident piping bullfrogs. The thin, shining line of the Miskatonic's upper reaches has an oddly serpent-like suggestion as it winds close to the feet of the domed hills among which it rises. As the hills draw nearer, one heeds their wooded sides more than their stone-crowned tops. Those sides loom up so darkly and precipitously that one wishes they would keep their distance, but there is no road by which to escape them. Across a covered bridge, one sees a small village huddled between the stream and vertical slope of Round Mountain, and wonders at the cluster of rotting gambrel roofs, bespeaking an earlier architectural period than that of the neighboring region. It is not reassuring to see, on a closer glance, that most of these houses are deserted and falling to ruin, and that the broken steepled church now harbors the one slovenly mercantile establishment of the hamlet. One dreads to trust the tenebrous tunnel of the bridge, yet there is no way to avoid it. Once across, it is hard to prevent the impression of a faint, malign odor about the village street, as of the mass mold and decay of centuries. It is always a relief to get clear of the place and to follow the narrow road around the base of the hills and across the level country beyond till it rejoins the Aylesbury Pike. Afterwards, one sometimes learned that one has been through Dunwich. Outsiders visit Dunwich as seldom as possible, and since a certain season of horror, all the signboards pointing towards it have been taken down. The scenery, judged by any ordinary aesthetic canon, is more than commonly beautiful, yet there is no influx of artists or summer tourists. 2 centuries ago, when the talk of witch blood, Satan worship, and strange forest presence was not laughed at, it was the custom to give reason for avoiding the locality. In our sensible age, since the Dunwich Horror of 1982 was hushed up by those who had the town's and the world's welfare at heart, people shun it without knowing exactly why. Perhaps one reason, though it cannot apply to uninformed strangers, is that the natives are now repellently decadent, having gone far along that path of retrogression so common in many New England backwaters. They have come to form a race by themselves, with the well-defined mental and physical stigma of degeneracy and inbreeding. The average of their intelligence is woefully low, whilst their annals reek of overt viciousness and of half-hidden murders, incests, and deeds almost unnameably violent and perversity. What's up, Metastep? Almost unnameable violence and perversity. The old gentry, representing the 2 or 3 Armingerous families, which came from Salem in 1692. He's saying that it's in backwater New England, not all over New England. Not all over the place, just in these dark, nasty pockets that he's describing. Specifically Dunwich. You must. Don't be sensitive. It's just a book. Okay. The old gentry, representing the 2 or 3 Armigerous families, which came from Salem in 1692, have kept somewhat above the general level of decay, though many branches are sunk into the sordid populace so deeply that only their names remain as a key to the origin they disgrace. Some of the Watleys and bishops still send their oldest sons to Harvard and Miskatonic, though those sons seldom return to the moldering gambrel roofs under which they and their ancestors were born. No one, even those who have the facts concerning the recent horror, can say just what is the matter with Dunwich, though old legends speak of unhallowed rites and conclaves of the Indians, amidst which they called forbidden shapes of shadow out of the great rounded hills, and made wild orgastic prayers that were answered by loud crackings and rumblings from the ground below. In 1747, the Reverend Abijah Hoadley, newly come to the Congregational Church at Dunwich Village, preached a memorable sermon on the close presence of Satan and his imps, in which he said, "It must be allowed that these blasphemies of an infernal train of demons are matters of too common knowledge to be denied. The cursed voices of Azazel and Burial, of Beelzebub and Belial, being heard now from underground of above by a score of credible witnesses now living. I myself did not more than a fortnight ago catch a very plain discourse of evil powers in the hills behind my house, wherein there was a rattling and rolling, groaning, screeching, and hissing. There is such as no things of this earth could raise up, and which must needs have come from those caves that only black magic can discover and only devil unlock." Devil? I'll have to look at that. Mr. Hoadley disappeared soon after delivering the sermon, but the text, printed in Springfield, is still extant. Noises in the hills continue to be reported from year to year and still form a puzzle to geologists and physiographers. Other traditions tell of foul odors near the hill crowning circles of stone pillars, and of rushing airy presences to be heard faintly at certain hours from stated points at the bottom of the great ravines, while still others try to explain the Devil's Hop Yard, a bleak, blasted hillside where no trees, shrub, or grass blade will grow. Then, too, the natives are more mortally afraid of the numerous whippoorwills which grow vocal on warm nights. It is vowed that the birds are psychopomps lying in wait for the souls of the dying, and that they time their eerie cries in unison with the sufferer's struggling breaths. If they can catch the fleeing soul when it leaves the body, they instantly flutter away, chittering in demonic laughter. But if they fail, they subside gradually into a disappointed silence. These tales, of course, are obsolete and ridiculous because they come down from very old times. Dunwich is indeed ridiculously old, older by far than any of the communities within the 30 miles of it. South of the village, one may still spy the cellar wall and chimney of the ancient bishop house, which was built before 1700, whilst the ruins of the mill at the falls, built in 1806, form the most modern piece of architecture to be seen. Industry did not flourish here, and the 19th century factory movement proved short-lived. Oldest of all are the great rings of rough-hewn stone columns on the hilltops, but these are more generally attributed to the Indians than to the settlers. Deposits of skulls and bones found within these circles and around the sizable table-like rock on Sentinel Hill sustain the popular belief that such spots were once the burial place of the Pocumtucks, even though many ethnologists, disregarding the absurd improbability of such a theory, persist in believing the remains Caucasian. It was in the township of Dunwich, in a large, partly inhabited farmhouse set against a hillside 4 miles from the village and 1.5 miles from any other dwelling, that Wilbur Whatley was born at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, the 2nd of February, 1913. This date was recalled because it was Candlemas, which people in Dunwich curiously observe under another name, because the noises in the hills had sounded, and all the dogs of the countryside had barked persistently throughout the night before. Less worthy of notice was the fact that the mother was one of the decadent Whatleys, a somewhat deformed, unattractive albino woman of 35, living with an aged and half-insane father about whom the most frightful tales of wizardry had been whispered in his youth. Lavinia Whatley had no known husband, but according to the custom of the region had made no attempt to disavow the child, concerning the other side of whose ancestry the country folk might and did speculate wildly as they chose. On the contrary, she seemed strangely proud of the dark, goatish-looking infant who formed such a contrast to her own sickly and pink-eyed albinism, and was heard to mutter mainly curious prophecies about its unusual powers and tremendous future. Lavinia was one who would be apt to mutter such things, for she was a lone creature given to wandering amidst the thunderstorms in the hills, and trying to read the great odorous books which her father had inherited through 2 centuries of Whatleys, and which were fast falling to pieces with age and wormholes. She had never been to school, but was filled with disjointed scraps of ancient lore that old Whatleys had taught her. The remote farmhouse had always been feared because of old Whatley's reputation for black magic and the unexplained death by violence of Mrs. Whatley. Hey, Robust. When Lavinia was 12, when Lavinia was 12 and had not helped to make the place popular. And the unexplained death by violence of Mrs. Whatley when Lavinia was 12 years old had not helped to make the place popular. Isolated among strange influences, Lavinia was fond of wild and grandiose daydreams and singular occupations, nor was her leisure much taken up by household cares in a home from which all standards of order and cleanliness had long since disappeared. There was a hideous scream which echoed above even the hill noises and the dogs barking on the night Wilbur was born, but no known doctor or midwife presided at his coming. Neighbors knew nothing of him till a week afterwards, when old Whatley drove his sleigh through the snow into Dunwich village and discoursed incoherently to the group of loungers at Osborne's general store. There seemed to be a change in the old man, an added element of furtiveness in the clouded brain which subtly transformed him from an object to a subject of fear. Though he was not one to be perturbed by any common family event, amidst it all he shewed some trace of pride later noticed by his daughter, and what he said of the child's paternity was remembered by many of his hearers years afterwards. I don't care what you folks think. If Lavinia's boy looked like his pa, he wouldn't look like nothing you expect. You needn't think the only folk is the folks hereabouts. Lavinia's read some and has seen some things most you only tell about. I calculate her man is as good a husband as ye can find this side of Astlebury. And if you knowed so much about the hills as I do, you wouldn't ask no better church wedding nor hearing. Let me tell you something. Someday you folks will hear a child o' Lavinia's a calling its father's name on the hilltop. Father's name on the top o' Sentinel Hill. Oh boy. Those sections, my God. I need a little practice there. The only persons who saw Wilbur during the first month of his life were old Zachariah Whatley of the undecayed Whatleys and Earl Sawyer's common-law wife, Mamie Bishop. Mamie's visit was frankly one of curiosity, and her subsequent tales did justice to her observations. But Zachariah came to lead a pair of ordinary cows which old Whatley had bought off his son Curtis. This marked the beginning, of course, of a cattle buying on the part of small Wilbur's family, which ended only in 1928, when the Dunwich Horror came and went. Yet at no time did the ramshackle Whatley barn seem overcrowded with livestock. There came a period when people were curious enough to steal up and count the herd that grazed precariously on the steep hillside above the old farmhouse, and they could never find more than 10 or 12 anemic, bloodless-looking specimen. Evidently, some blight or distemper perhaps sprung from the unwholesome pasturage or the diseased fungi and timbers of the filthy barn, caused a heavy mortality among the Whatley animals. Old wounds or sores, having something of the aspect of incisions, seemed to inflict the visible cattle, and once or twice during the earlier months, certain callers fancied they could discern similar sores about the throats of the gray, unshaven old man and his slatternly, crinkled-haired albino daughter. In the spring after Wilbur's death, Lavinia resumed her customary rambles in the hills, bearing in her misproportioned arms the swarthy child. Public interest in the Whatleys subsided after most of the country folk had seen the baby, and no one bothered to comment on the swift development which the newcomers seemed every day to exhibit. Wilbur's growth was indeed phenomenal, for within 3 months of his birth he had attained a size and muscular power not usually found in infants under a full year of age. His motions and even his vocal sounds showed a restraint and deliberateness highly peculiar in an infant, and no one was really unprepared when, at 7 months, he began to walk unassisted, with faltering which another month was sufficient to remove. It was somewhat after this time, on Halloween, that a great blaze was seen at midnight on the top of Sentinel Hill, where the old table-like stone stands amidst its tumulus of ancient bones. Considerable talk was started when Silas Bishop, of the undecayed bishops, mentioned having seen the boy running sturdily up that hill ahead of his mother about an hour before the blaze was remarked. Silas was rounding up a stray heifer, but he nearly forgot his mission when he fleetingly spied the two figures in the dim light of his lantern. They darted almost noiselessly through the underbrush, and the astonished watcher seemed to think they were entirely unclothed. Afterward, he could not be sure about the boy, who may have had some kind of fringed belt and a pair of dark trunks or trousers on. Wilbur was never subsequently seen alive and conscious without complete and tightly buttoned attire, the disarrangement or threatened disarrangement of which always seemed to fill him with anger and alarm. His contrast with his squalid mother and grandfather in this respect was thought very notable until the horror of 1928 suggested the most valid of reasons. The next January, the gossips were mildly interested in the fact that Lavini's black brat had commenced to talk, and at the age of only 11 months. His speech was somewhat remarkable, both because of its difference from the ordinary accents of the region, and because it displayed a freedom from infantile lisping, of which many children of 3 or 4 might well be proud. The boy was not talkative, yet when he spoke, he seemed to reflect some elusive element wholly unpossessed by Dunwich and its dozens. The strangeness did not reside in what he said, or even in the simple idioms he used, but seemed vaguely linked with his intonation, or with the internal organs that produced the spoken sounds. His facial aspect, too, was remarkable for its maturity. Though he shared his mother's and grandfather's chinlessness, his firm, precocious-shaped nose, united with the expression of his large, dark, almost Latin eyes, to give him an air of quasi-adulthood and well-nigh preternatural intelligence. He was, however, exceedingly ugly despite his appearance of brilliancy. There was something almost goatish or animalistic about his thick lips, large-pored yellow skin, coarse, crinkly hair, and oddly elongated ears. He was soon disliked even more decidedly than his mother and grandsire, and all conjecture about him was spiced with references to the bygone magic of old Whatley, and how the hills once shook when he shrieked the dreadful name of Yog Sotho in the midst of a circle of stones with a great book open in his arms before him. Dogs abhorred the boy, and he always obliged to take various defensive measures against the barking menace. Meanwhile, old Whatley continued to buy cattle without measurably increasing the size of his herd. He also cut timber and began to repair the unused parts of the house. A spacious peaked roof affair whose rear end was buried entirely in the rocky hillside, and whose 3 least-ruined ground floor rooms had always been sufficient for himself and his daughter. There must have been prodigious reserves of strength in the old man to enable him to accomplish so much hard labor, and though he still babbled dementedly at times, his carpentry seemed to shew the effects of sound calculation. It had already begun as soon as Wilbur was born, when one of the many tool sheds had been put suddenly in order, clapboarded and fitted with a stout fresh lock. Now in restoring the abandoned upper story of the house, he was a no less thorough craftsman. His mania shewed itself only in his tight boarding up of all the windows in the reclaimed section, though many declared that it was a crazy thing to bother with the reclamation at all. Less inexplicable was his fitting up of another downstairs room for his new grandson, a room which several callers saw, though no one was ever admitted to the closely boarded upper story. The chamber he lined with tall, firm shelving, along which he began to gradually arrange in apparently careful order all the rotting ancient books and parts of books, which during his own day had been heaped promiscuously in odd corners of the various rooms. "I made some use of 'em," he would say, as he tried to mend a torn black-letter page with paste prepared on the rusty kitchen stove. "But the boy's fittin' to make better use of 'em. He orter have 'em as well sought as he can, for they're going to be all of his learning." Promiscuously. Promiscuity isn't only about sex. When Wilbur was a year and 7 months old in September of 1914, his size and accomplishments were almost alarming. He had grown as large as a child of 4 and was a fluent and incredibly intelligent talker. He ran freely about the fields and hills and accompanied his mother on all her wanderings. At home, he would pore diligently over the queer pictures and charts in his grandfather's books, while old Watley would instruct and chastise him through long, hushed afternoons. By this time, the restoration of the house was finished, and those who watched it wondered why only one of the upper windows had been made into a solid plank door. It was a window in the rear of the east gable end, close against the hill, and no one could imagine why a cleated wooden runway was built up to it from the ground. About the period of this work's completion, people noticed that the old tool house, tightly locked and windowlessly clapboarded since Wilbur's birth, had been abandoned again. The door swung listlessly open, and when Earl Sawyer once stepped within after a cattle selling call on old Watley, he was quite discomposed by the singular odor he encountered. Such a stench, he averred, as he had never before smelt in all his life except near the Indian circles on the hills, and which could not come from anything sane or of this earth. But then, the homes and sheds of the Dunwich folk have never been remarkable for their olfactory immaculateness. The following months were void of visible events, save that everyone swore to a slow but steady increase in the mysterious hill noises. On May Eve of 1915, there were tremors which even the Aylesbury people felt, whilst the following Halloween produced an underground rumbling queerly synchronized with bursts of flame, them which Watley's doings from the summit of Sentinel Hill. Wilbur was growing up uncannily, so that he looked like a boy of 10 as he entered his 4th year. He read avidly by himself now, but talked much less than formerly. A settled taciturnity was absorbing him, and for the first time people began to speak specifically of the dawning look of evil in his goatish face. He would sometimes mutter in an unfamiliar jargon and chant in bizarre rhythms which chilled the listener with a sense of unexplainable terror. The aversion displayed towards him by dogs had now become a matter of wide remark, and he was obliged to carry a pistol in order to traverse the countryside in safety. His occasional use of the weapon did not enhance his popularity among the owners of canine guardians. The fellow callers at the house would often find Lavinia alone on the ground floor, while odd cries and footsteps resounded in the boarded-up 2nd story. She would never tell what her father and the boy were doing up there, though once she turned pale and displayed an abnormal degree of fear when a jocose fish peddler tried the locked door leading to the stairway. The peddler told the store loungers at Dunwich Village they thought he heard a horse stamping on that floor above. The loungers reflected, thinking of the door and runway, and of the cattle that so swiftly disappeared. Then they shuddered as they recalled tales of old Watley's youth, and of the strange things that are called out of the earth when a bullock is sacrificed at the proper time to certain heathen gods. It had for some time been noticed that dogs had begun to hate and fear the whole Watley place as violently as they hated and feared young Wilbur personally. In 1917, the war came, and Squire Sawyer Watley, as chairman of the local draft board, had hard work finding a quota of young Dunwich men fit to even be sent to a development camp. The government, alarmed at such signs of wholesale regional decadence, sent several officers and medical experts to investigate. No, do not step on that, you little bastard. There, now you can step on it. Here. All right. Cats. Medical experts to investigate. Conducting a survey which New England newspaper readers still recall. It was the publicity attending this investigation which set reporters on the track of the Watleys and caused the Boston Globe and Arkham Advertiser to print flamboyant Sunday stories of young Wilbur's precociousness, old Watley's black magic, the shelves of strange books, the sealed second story of the ancient farmhouse, and the weirdness of the whole region and its hill noises. Wilbur was 4.5 then, and looked like a lad of 15. His lips and cheeks were fuzzy with a coarse dark down, and a voice had begun to break. Earl Sawyer went out to the Watleys' place with both sets of reporters and cameramen and called their attention to the queer stench which now seemed to trickle down from the sealed upper spaces. It was, he said, exactly like a smell he had found in the tool shed abandoned when the house was finally repaired, and the faint odors which he sometimes thought he caught near the stone circles on the mountains. Dunwich folk read the stories when they appeared and grinned over the obvious mistakes. They wondered, too, why the writers would make so much of the fact that old Watley always paid for his cattle in gold pieces of extremely ancient date. The Watleys had received their visitors with ill-concealed distaste, though they did not dare court further public publicity by a violent resistance or refusal to talk. For a decade, the annals of the Watleys sink indistinguishably into the general life of a morbid community used to their queer ways and hardened to their May Eve and All Hallow orgies. Twice a year, they would light fires on the top of the Sentinel Hill, at which time the mountain rumblings would recur with greater and greater violence, while at all seasons there were strange and portentous doings at the lonely farmhouse. In the course of time, callers professed to hear sounds in the sealed upper story, even when all the family were downstairs, and they wondered how swiftly or how lingeringly a cow or bullock was usually sacrificed. There was talk of a complaint to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but nothing ever came of it, since Dunwich folk are never anxious to call the outside world's attention to themselves. About 1923, when Wilbur was but a boy of 10, whose mind, voice, stature, and bearded face gave all the impressions of maturity, a second-grade siege of carpentry went on at the old house. It was all inside the sealed upper part, and from bits of discarded lumber, people concluded that the youth and his grandfather had knocked out all the partitions and even removed the attic floor, leaving only one vast open void between the ground story and the peaked roof. They had torn down the great central chimney, too, and fitted the rusty range with a flimsy outside tin stovepipe. In the spring after this event, old Watley noticed the growing number of whippoorwills that would come out of Cold Spring Glen to chirp under his window at night. He seemed to regard the circumstance as one of great significance, and told the lounger at Osborne's that he thought his time had almost come. "They whistled just in tune with my breathing now," he said, "and I guess they're getting ready to catch my soul. They know it's a-going out, and I don't calculate to miss it. You'll know, boys, arter I'm gone, whether they get me or not. If they do, they'll keep us singing and a-laughing till break of day. If they don't, they'll kinder quiet down like. I expect them at the souls they hunt for have some pretty tough tussle sometimes." On Lammas night, 1924, Dr. Houghton of Osselbury
was hastily summoned by Wilbur Whatley, who had lashed his one remaining horse through the darkness and telephoned from Osborne's in the village. He found old Whatley in a very grave state, with a cardiac action and stertorous breathing that told of an end not far off. The shapeless albino daughter and oddly bearded grandson stood by the bedside, whilst from the vacant abyss overhead there came a disquieting suggestion of rhythmical surging or lapping, as of the waves on some level beach. The doctor, though, was chiefly disturbed by the chattering night birds outside, a seemingly limitless legion of whippoorwill that cried their endless message in repetition, timed diabolically to the wheezing gasps of the dying man. It was uncanny and unnatural, too much, thought Dr. Houghton, like the whole of the region he had entered so reluctantly in response to the urgent call. Toward 1 o'clock, old Whatley gained consciousness and interrupted his wheezing to choke out a few words to his grandson. "More space, Willie. More space soon. You grows and that grows faster. It'll be ready to start to serve you soon, boy. Open up the gates to Yig South with the long chant that you find on page 751 of the complete edition, and then put on a match to the prison. Fire from the earth. Can't burn it nohow." He was obviously quite mad. After a pause, during which the flock of whippoorwills outside adjusted their cries to altered tempo, while some indications of the strange hill noises from afar off, he added another sentence or two. "Feed it regular, Willie, and mind the quantity, but don't let it grow too fast for the place, for if it busts quarters or gets out for you open to Yogsoth, it's all over and no use. Only them from beyond can make it multiply and work. Only them, the old uns, as wants to come back." But the speech gave place to gasps again, and Lavinia screamed at the way the whippoorwills followed the change. It was the same for more than an hour when the final throaty rattle came. Dr. Houghton drew shrunken lids over glazing gray eyes as the tumult of the birds faded imperceptibly to silence. Lavinia sobbed, but Wilbur only chuckled whilst the hill noises rumbled faintly. "They didn't get him," he muttered in his heavy bass voice. Wilbur was by this time a scholar of really tremendous erudition in his one-sided way, and was quietly known by correspondence to many librarians in distant places where rare and forbidden books of old days are kept. He was more and more hated and dreaded around Dunwich because of certain youthful disappearances which suspicion laid vaguely at his door, but was always able to silence inquiry through fear or through use of that fund of old-time gold which still, in his grandfather's time, went forth regularly and increasingly for cattle buying. He was now tremendously mature of aspect, and his height, having reached the normal adult limit, seemed inclined to wax beyond that figure. In 1925, when a scholarly correspondent from Miskatonic University called upon him one day and departed, pale and puzzled, he was fully 6 3/4 feet tall. "Hey, Dave." Through all the years, Wilbur had treated his half-deformed albino mother with a growing contempt, finally forbidding her to go to the hills with him on May Eve and Hallowmas. In 1926, the poor creature complained to Mamie Bishop of being afraid of him. "There's more about him as I knows than I can tell you, Mamie," she said, "and nowadays there's more nor what I know myself. A vow for God. I don't know what he wants nor what he's a trying to do. That Halloween on the hill, noises sounded louder than ever, and fire burned on Sentinel Hill as usual. But people paid more attention to the rhythmical screaming of vast flocks of unnaturally belated whippoorwills, which seemed to be assembled near the unlighted Watley farmhouse. Doing pretty good, Dave. After midnight, their shrill notes burst into a kind of pandemoniac chitination which filled all the countryside, and not until dawn did they finally quiet down, when they vanished, hurrying southward, where they were fully a month overdue. What this meant, no one could quite be certain until later. None of the country folk seemed to have died, but poor Lavinia Watley, the twisted albino, was never seen again. In the summer of 1927, Wilbur repaired 2 sheds in the farmyard and began moving his books and effects out to them. Soon afterward, Earl Sawyer told the loungers at Osborne's that more carpentry was going on at the Watley farmhouse. Wilbur was closing all the doors and windows on the ground floor and seemed to be taking out partitions as he and his grandfather had done upstairs 4 years before. He was living in one of the sheds, and Sawyer thought he seemed unusually worried and tremulous. People generally suspected him of knowing something about his mother's disappearance, and very few ever approached his neighborhood now. His height had increased to more than 7 feet and showed no signs of ceasing its development. The following winter brought an event no less strange than Wilbur's first trip outside of the Dunwich region. Correspondence with the Widener Library at Harvard, the Bibliothèque Nationale at Paris, the British Museum, the University of Buenos Aires, and the Library of Miskatonic University of Arkham had failed to get him the loan of a book he desperately wanted. So at length he set out in person, shabby, dirty, bearded, and uncouth of dialect, to consult the copy at Miskatonic, which was the nearest him geographically. Almost 8 feet tall and carrying a cheap new valise from Osborne's general store, the dark and goatish gargoyle appeared one day in Arkham in quest of the dreaded volume kept under lock and key at the college library. The hideous Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred in Olaus Wormius Latin's version, as printed in Spain in the 17th century. He had never seen a city before, but had no thought save to find his way to the university grounds, where, indeed, he passed heedlessly by the great white-fanged watchdogs that barked with unnatural fury and inimity, and tugged frantically at its stout chain. Wilbur had with him the priceless but imperfect copy of Dr. Dee's English version, which his grandfather had bequeathed to him, and upon receiving some access to the Latin copy, he at once began to collate the 2 texts with the aim of discovering a certain passage which he would have come on the 751st page of his own defective volume. Oh, congratulations, Sleazy. This much he could not civilly refrain from telling the librarian. The same erudite Henry Armitage, A.M. Miskatonic, Ph.D. Princeton, Lit.D. John Hopkins, who had once called at the farm, and who now politely plied him with questions. He was looking, he had to admit, for a kind of formula or incantation containing the frightful name Yog-Sothoth, and it puzzled him to find discrepancies, duplications, and ambiguities. Which made the matter of determination far from easy. He copied the formula he finally chose. Dr. Armitage looked involuntarily over his shoulder at the open pages, the left-handed one which, in the Latin version, contained such monstrous threat to the peace and sanity of the world. Nor is it to be thought, ran the text as Armitage mentally translated, that a man is either the oldest or the last of Earth's masters, or that the common bulk of life and substance walks alone. The old ones were, the old ones are, and the old ones shall be. Not in the space we know, but between them. They walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us unseen. Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and the guardian of the gate. Past, present, future are all one in Yog-Sothoth. He knows where the old ones broke through of old, and where they shall break through again. He knows where they have trod earth's fields and where they still tread them, and why no one can behold them as they tread. But their smell can men sometimes know them. By their smell can men sometimes know them near, but of their semblance can no man know, saving only in the features of those they have begotten on mankind. And of those there are many sorts, differing in likeness from man's truest eidolon to that shape with outsider substance which is them. They walk unseen and in foul, lonely places, where the words have been spoken and the rites howled through at their seasons. The wind gibbers with their voices, and the earth mutters with their consciousness. They bend the forest and crush the city, yet may not forest or city behold the hand that smites. Kadath is the cold waste hath known them, and what man has known Kadath? The ice deserts of the south and the second isles of the ocean hold stones whereon their seal is engraven. But who hath seen the deep frozen city, or the sealed tower long garlanded with seaweed and barnacles? Great Cthulhu is their cousin, yet he can spy them only dimly. Aye, Shubndigrath. As a foulness shall ye know them. Their hand is at your throats, yet ye see them not. And their habitation is even one with your guarded threshold. Yog-Sothoth is the key to the gate, whereby the spheres meet. Man rules now, where they ruled once. They shall soon rule where man rules now. After summer is winter, after winter summer. They wait patient and potent, for here shall they reign again. Dr. Armitage, associating what he was reading with what he had heard of Dunwich and its brooding presence, and of Wilbur Whatley and his dim, hideous aura that stretched from dubious birth to a cloud of probable matricide, felt a wave of fright as tangible as a draught of the tomb's cold clamminess. The bent, goatish giant before him seemed like the spawn of another planet or dimension, like something only partly of mankind, and linked to a black gulf of essence and entity that stretched like Titan phantasms beyond all spheres of force and matter, space and time. Presently, Wilbur raised his head and began speaking in that strange, resonant fashion which hinted at sound-producing organs unlike the run of mankind's. Mr. Armitage, he said, I calculate I gotta take that book home. There's things in it I've got to try under certain conditions that I can't get here, and it would be a mortal sin to let a red tape rule hold me up. Let me take it along, sir, and I swear they won't nobody know the difference. I don't need to tell you. I'll take a good care of it. It wasn't me that put this D copy in the shape it is. He stopped as he saw a firm denial on the librarian's face, and his own goatish features grew crafty. Armitage, half ready to tell him he might make a copy of what parts he needed, thought suddenly of the possible consequences and checked himself. There was too much responsibility in giving such a being the key to such blasphemous outer spheres. Watley saw how things stood and tried to answer lightly. Well, all right, if you feel that way about it. Maybe Harvard wouldn't be so fussy as you be. Without saying more, he rose and strode out of the building, stooping at each doorway. Armitage heard the savage yelping of the great watchdog and studied Watley's gorilla-like lope as he crossed the bit of campus visible from the window. He thought of the wild tales he had heard and recalled the old Sunday stories in the Advisor. These things and the lore he had picked up from Dunwich rustics and villagers during his one visit there. Unseen things not of Earth, or at least not of tridimensional Earth, rushed fetid and horrible through New England's glens and brooded obscenely on the mountain tops. Of this he had long felt certain. Now he seemed to sense the close presence of some terrible part of the intruding horror, and to glimpse a hellish advance in the black domain of the ancient and once passive nightmare. He locked away the Necronomicon with a shudder of disgust, but the room still reeked with an unholy and unidentifiable stench. As a foulness ye shall know them, he quoted. Yes, the odor was the same as that which had sickened him at the Watley farmhouse less than 3 years before. He thought of Wilbur, goatish and ominous, once again, and laughed mockingly at the village rumors of his parentage. Inbreeding, Armitage muttered half aloud to himself. Great God, what simpletons. Shoo them off for Machen's great god Pan, and they'll think it a common Dunwich scandal. But what thing, what cursed, shapeless influence on or off this three-dimensional earth was Wilbur Watley's father, born on Candlemas, 9 months after May Eve of 1912? When the talk about the queer earth noises reached clear to Arkham, what walked on the mountain that May night? What rude Miss Horror fastened itself on in the world in a half-human flesh and blood? During the ensuing weeks, Dr. Armitage set about to collect all possible data on Wilbur Watley and the formless presence around Dunwich. He got in communication with Dr. Houghton of Asbury, who had attended old Watley in his last illness, and found much to ponder over in the grandfather's last words as quoted by the physician. A visit to Dunwich village failed to bring out much that was new, but a close survey of the Necronomicon in those parts which Wilbur had sought so avidly seemed to supply new and terrible clues to the nature, methods, and desires of the strange evils so vaguely threatening this planet. Talks with several students of archaic lore in Boston and letters to many others elsewhere gave him a growing amazement which passed slowly through varied degrees of alarm to a state of really acute spiritual fear. As the summer drew on, he felt dimly that something ought to be done about the lurking terror of the upper Miskatonic Valley and about the monstrous being known to the human world as Wilbur Watley. The Dunwich Horror itself came between Lammas and the equinox in 1928, and Dr. Armitage was among those who witnessed the monstrous prologue. He had heard, meanwhile, of Watley's grotesque trip to Cambridge and of his frantic efforts to borrow or copy from the Necronomicon at the Widener Library. Those efforts had been in vain, since Armitage had issued warnings of the keenest intensity to all librarians having charge of the dreaded volume. Wilbur had been shockingly nervous at Cambridge, anxious for the book, yet almost equally anxious to get home again, as if he feared the results of being away long. Early in August, the half-expected outcome developed, and in the small hours of the 3rd, Dr. Armitage was awakened suddenly by the wild, fierce cries of the savage watchdog on the college campus. Deep and terrible, the snarling, half-mad growls and barks continued, always in mounting volume, but with hideously significant pauses. Then there rang out a scream from a wholly different throat, such a scream as roused half the sleepers of Arkham and haunted their dreams ever afterwards, such a scream as could come from no being born of earth or wholly of earth. Armitage hastened into some clothing and, rushing across the street and lawn to the college building, saw that others were ahead of him and heard echoes of a burglar alarm still shrilling from the library. An open window shewed black and gaping in the moonlight. What had come had indeed completed its entrance, for the barking and the screaming, now fast fading into a mixed low growling and moaning, proceeded unmistakably from within. Some instinct warned Armitage that what was taking place was not a thing for unfortified eyes to see, so he brushed back the crowd with authority as he unlocked the vestibule door. Among the others, he saw Professor Warren Rice and Dr. Francis Morgan, men to whom he had told some of his conjectures and misgivings, and these two he motioned to accompany him inside. The inward sounds, except for a watchful, droning whine from the dog, had by this time quite subsided, but Armitage now perceived with a sudden start that a loud chorus of whippoorwills among the shrubbery had commenced a damnably rhythmical piping, as if in unison with the last breaths of a dying man. The building was full of a frightful stench, which Dr. Armitage knew too well, and the three men rushed across the hall to the excuse me, to the small genealogical reading room where the low whining came. For a second, nobody dared to turn on the light. Then Armitage summoned his courage and snapped the switch. One of three, it is not certain which, shrieked aloud at what sprawled before them among disordered tables and overturned chairs. Professor Wright declared that he wholly lost consciousness for an instant, though he did not stumble or fall. The thing that lay half bent on its side in a fetid pool of greenish yellow ichor and tarry stickiness was almost 9 feet tall, and the dog had torn off all the clothing and some of the skin. It was not quite dead, but twitched silently and spasmodically, while its chest heaved in monstrous unison with the mad piping of the expectant whippoorwills outside. Bits of shoe leather and fragments of apparel were scattered about the room, and just inside the window, an empty canvas sack where it had evidently been thrown. Near the central desk, a revolver had fallen, a dented but undischarged cartridge later explaining why it had not been fired. The thing itself, however, crowded out all other images at the time. It would be trite and not wholly accurate to say that no human pen could describe it, but one may properly say that it could not be vividly visualized by anyone whose ideas of aspect and contour are too closely bound up with the common life forms of this planet and of the 3 known dimensions. It was partly human, beyond a doubt, with a very man-like hands and head, and the goatish, chinless face had the stamp of the Watleys upon it. But the torso and lower parts of the body were tetralogically fabulous, so that only generous clothing could have ever enabled it to walk on earth unchallenged or uneradicated. Above the waist, it was semi-anthropomorphic, though its chest, where the dog's rending paws still rested watchfully, had the leathery, reticulated hide of a crocodile or alligator. The back was piebald with yellow and black and dimly suggested the squamous covering of certain snakes. Below the waist, though, it was the worst, for here all human resemblance left off and sheer fantasy began. The skin was thickly covered with coarse fur, and from the abdomen a score of large greenish-gray tentacles with red sucking mouths protruded limply. Their arrangement was odd and seemed to follow the symmetries of some cosmic geometry unknown to Earth or the solar system. On each of the hips, deep set in a kind of pinkish ciliated orbit, was what seemed to be a rudimentary eye, whilst in lieu of a tail, there depended a kind of trunk or feeler with purple annular markings, and with many evidences of being an undeveloped mouth or throat. The limbs, save for their black fur, roughly resembled the hind legs of prehistoric Earth's giant saurians, and terminated in ridgy veined pads that were neither hooves nor claws. When the thing breathed, its tail and tentacles rhythmically changed color, as if from some circulatory cause normal to the non-human side of its ancestry. In the tentacles, this was observable as a deepening of the greenish tinge, whilst in the tail it was manifest as a yellowish appearance, which alternated with a sickly grayish white in the space between the purple rings. Of genuine blood there was none, only the fetid greenish-yellow ichor, which trickled along the painted floor beyond the radius of the stickiness, and left a curious discoloration behind it. As the presence of the three men seemed to rouse the dying thing, it began to mumble without turning or raising its head. Dr. Armitage made no written record of its mouthings, but asserts confidently that nothing in English was uttered. At first, the syllables defied all correlation with any speech of earth, but towards the last there came some disjointed fragments evidently taken from the Necronomicon, that monstrous blasphemy in the quest of which the thing had perished. These fragments, as Armitage recalls them, ran something like Nagai Nigahaka Bugshago Yaha Yagsahoth Yagsahoth. They trailed off into nothingness as the whippoorwills shrieked in rhythmical crescendos of unholy anticipation. Then came a halt in the gasping, and the dog raised its head in a long, lugubrious howl. A change came over the yellow, goatish face of the prostrate thing, and great black eyes fell in appallingly. Outside the window, the shrilling of the whippoorwills had suddenly ceased, and above the murmur of the gathering crowd there came the sounds of a panic-struck whirring and fluttering. Against the moon, vast clouds of feathery watchers rose and raced from sight, frantic at that which they had sought for prey. All at once the dog started up abruptly and gave a frightened bark, and leaped nervously out of the window by which it had entered. A cry rose from the crowd, and Dr. Armitage shouted to the men outside that no one must be admitted till the police or medical examiner came. He was thankful that the windows were just too high to permit peering in, and drew the dark curtains carefully down over each one. By the time two policemen had arrived, Dr. Morgan, meeting them in the vestibule, was urging them for their own sakes to postpone entrance to the stench-filled reading room till the examiner came and the prostrate thing could be covered up. I know my pronunciation was bad. There's a reason I don't perform these rituals. English is hard enough. Asking for gummy bears. I am now going to have to, when I finally get these watch hours, I am now going to make a gummy bear emote. A gummy Cthulhu? I don't know. We'll see about that. I have to figure that one out. I have to come up with money. One thing at a time. Where was I? Meanwhile, frightful changes were taking place on the floor. One need not describe the kind and rate of shrinkage and disintegration that occurred before the eyes of Dr. Armitage and Professor Rice, but it's permissible to say that, aside from the external appearance of face and hands, the really human elements in Wilbur Whatley must have been very small. When the medical examiner came, and there was only a sticky, whitish mass on the painted boards, and the monstrous odor had nearly disappeared. Apparently Whatley had no skull or bony skeleton, at least in any true or stable sense. he had taken somewhat after his unknown father. Yet all this was only the prologue of the actual Dunwich Horrors. Formalities were gone through by bewildered officials. Abnormal details were duly kept away from press and public, and men were sent to Dunwich and Esselbury to look up property and notify any who might be, heirs of the late Wilbur Whatley. They found the countryside in great agitation, both because of the growing rumblings beneath the domed hills, and because of the unwonted stench and surging, lapping sounds which came increasingly from the great empty shell formed by Whatley's boarded-up farmhouse. Earl Sawyer, who tended the horse and the cattle during Wilbur's absence, had developed a woefully acute case of nerves. The officials devised excuses not to enter the noisome boarded place, and were glad to confine their survey of the deceased's living quarters, the newly mended sheds, to a single visit. They filed a ponderous report at the courthouse in Aylesbury, and litigations considering heirship are said to still be in progress among the innumerable Whatleys, decayed and undecayed, of the upper Miskatonic Valley. An almost interminable manuscript in strange characters, written in huge ledger and adjudged a sort of diary because of the spacing and variations in ink and penmanship, presented a baffling puzzle to those who found it on the old bureau which served as its owner's desk. After a week of debate, it was sent to Miskatonic University, together with the deceased's collections of strange books for study and possible translation. Possible. But even the best linguists soon saw that it was not likely to be unriddled with ease. No trace of the ancient gold which Wilbur and old Whatley always paid their debts with has yet been discovered. In the dark of September 9th, it was in the dark of September 9th that the horror broke loose. The hill noises had been very pronounced in the evening, and the dogs barked frantically all night. Early risers on the 10th noticed a peculiar stench in the air. About 7 o'clock, Luther Brown, the hired boy at George Corey's between Cold Spring Glen and the village, rushed frenziedly back from his morning trip to 10-acre meadow with the cows. He was almost convulsed with fright as he stumbled into the kitchen, and in the yard outside, the no less frightened herd were pawing and lowing pitifully, having followed the boy back in the panic they shared with him. Between gasps, Luther tried to stammer out his tale to Miss Corey. "Up there in that rud beyond the glen, Miss Corey, there's something been there. It smells like thunder, and all the bushes and little trees is pushed back from the rud like they'd been like they has been moved along it. And that ain't the worst neither. There's prints in the rud, Miss Corey. Great round prints as big as barrel heads, all sucked down deep like an elephant had been along. Only they's a sight more nor 4 feet up could make. I looked at one or two afore I run, and I see even one was covered with lines spreading out from one place, like as if a big palm leaf fan, twict or 3 times as big as any they is. It'd have been pounded down into the rud, and the smell was awful, like what was around the Wizard Whatley's old house." Oh my God. He faltered, and it seemed to shiver afresh with the fright that had sent him flying home. Miss Corey, unable to extract more information, began telephoning the neighbors, thus starting on its rounds the overture of panic that heralded the major terrors. When she got Sally Sawyer, housekeeper at Seth Bishop's, the nearest place to Whatley's, it became her turn to listen instead of transmit. For Sally's boy Chauncey, who slept poorly, had been up on the hill towards Watley's and dashed back in terror after one look at the place and at the pasturage where Mr. Bishop's cows had been left out all night. She likely could have, yes. I could probably do it really well with some practice, but I don't have that kind of time. Yes, Miss Corey, came Sally's tremulous voice over the party wire. Chauncey said he just come back a postin', and he couldn't half talk for being scared. He says old Watley's house is all blowed up with the timbers scattered around like they been dynamited inside. Only the bottom floor ain't through, but it's all covered with a kind of tar-like stuff. It smells awful and drips down off in the arches into the ground where the side timbers is blown away. And they awfully kinder marks in the yard. Two great round marks, bigger round than a hogshead. And all sticky with stuff like is on the blowed up house. Chauncey said they leads off into the meadows, where a great swath wide in the barns all matted down, and all the stone walls tumbled every which way wherever it goes. Oh boy. And he says he, Miss Corey, as how he saw for Seth's cows, frightened as he was, found 'em up in the upper pasture night in Devil's Hop Yard in awful shape. Half 'em's clean gone, and half 'em's them's that's left sucked most dry of blood, with sores on 'em like they been on the Watley's cattle ever since Lavini's black brat was born. Seth says he's out now looking for 'em, though I vow he won't care to get very nigh Wizard Watley's. Chauncey didn't look careful to see where in the big matted down swath led arter it left the pasturage, but he says he thinks it pointing towards the Glen Rud in the village. I feel like I should potentially translate that. Because there's more. Here we go. I tell you, Miss Corey, there's something broad that hadn't oughter been abroad, and I for one think that Black Wilbur Watley, as come in bad end as he deserved, is the bottom of breeding of it. He wasn't all human himself, as I always say to everybody, and I think he and old Watley must have raised something in that there nailed up house as ain't even so human as he was. They all's been unseen around Dunwich, living things as ain't human ain't good for human folks. The ground was talking last night, and toward the morning, Chauncey, he heard the whippoorwills so loud in Coral Springs Glen, he couldn't sleep none. Then when he thought he heard another faint-like sound over towards Wizard Watley's, a kind of ripping or tearing of wood, like some big box or crater was being opened fur off. I think I irritated sheep. What with this and that, he didn't get to sleep at all till sunup, and no sooner was he up this morning, but he go over to Watley's and see what was the matter. He see enough, I tell you, Miss Corey, that don't mean no good, and I think that all the men folks ought to get up and party and do something. I know something's awful about it, and I feel my time is nigh, though only God knows just what it is. Did your Luther take account of where them big tracks led to? No? Well, Miss Corey, if they was on the Glen Road, this side of the Glen, and ain't got to your house yet, I calculate they must be going to Glen himself. They would do that. I always say Coal Springs Glen ain't no healthy nor decent place. The whippoorwills and fireflies there never did act like they was creatures of God, and they's them, as ye can say, ye can hear strange things a rushing and a talking air down there if you stand in the right place, at way between the rock falls and Bear's Den. By noon, fully 3/4 of the men and boys of Dunwich were trooping over the roads and meadows between the new-made Watley ruins and Cold Springs Glen, examining in horror the vast, monstrous prints, the maimed bishop cattle, the strange, noisome wreck of the farmhouse, and the bruised, matted vegetation of the fields and roadsides. Whatever had burst loose upon the world had assuredly gone down into the great sinister ravine, for all the trees on the banks were bent and broken, and a great avenue had been gouged into the precipice hanging underbrush. It was as though a house launched by an avalanche had slid down through the tangled growths of the almost vertical slope. From below, no sound came, but only distant, undefined thunder. And it is not to be wondered that the men preferred to stay on the edge and argue rather than descend and beard the unknown cyclopean horror in its lair. 3 dogs that were with the party had barked furiously at first, but seemed cowed and reluctant when near the glen. Someone telephoned the new Aylesbury transcript, but the editor, accustomed to wild tales from Dunwich, did no more than concoct a humorous paragraph about it, an item soon afterward reproduced by the Associated Press. I should get Sheep to do these bits. He'd probably do them better than I would. Yeah, I don't know if he knows what I'm talking about. No, he doesn't. I looked at him while talking, and I think he agreed to do it, but he doesn't know what he agreed to. Huh? There's accents in this book, and they were saying that you would do a better job than I would.
Guys, it's not about me. It's about her. I think she's doing fine.
No, I'm not. I'm doing awful.
You're rushing. You're rushing, but you're mostly consistent with your accents.
Yeah, it's terrible. Oh no, consent is questionable. Consent is definitely questionable. Yeah, if I slowed down, maybe. But, I don't know. Someday I'll practice that more and do it right. All right, where did we leave off? Associated Press. That's where we are. Christ, how much more do we got? I think... Yeah, we're just going to read the end of this one. Well, maybe we can do the end of the next one. Let me see here. Yeah, Oh, Christ, if we go that far, it's almost like we might as well just finish it. I guess we could get through all this tonight. Because there really isn't that much left. All right. Well, in a way, it's less goofily racist when horror does it. I mean, all these people are supposed to be white. That night, everyone went home, and every house and barn was barricaded as stoutly as possible. Needless to say, no cattle were allowed to remain in open pasturage. About 2 in the morning, a frightful stench and the savage barking of the dogs awakened the household at Elmer Fry's on the eastern edge of Cold Spring Glen, and all agreed that they could hear a sort of muffled swishing or lapping sound from somewhere outside. Miss Fry proposed telephoning the neighbors, and Elmer was about to agree when the noise of splintering wood burst in upon their deliberations. It came, apparently, from the barn, and was quickly followed by a hideous screaming and stamping among the cattle. The dogs slavered and crouched close to the feet of the fear-numbed family. Fry lit a lantern through force of habit, but knew it would be death to go out into that black farmyard. The children and womenfolk whimpered, kept from screaming by some obscure vestigial instinct of defense which told them their lives depended on silence. At last, the noise of the cattle subsided to a pitiful moaning, and a great snapping, crashing, and crackling ensued. The Frys, huddled together in the sitting room, did not dare move until the last echoes died away far down in Cold Springs Glen. Then, amidst the dismal moans from the stable and the demonic piping of the late whippoorwills in the glen, Selina Fry tottered to the telephone and spread what news she could of the second phase of the horror. And the next day, all the countryside was in a panic, and cowed, uncommunicative groups came and went where the fiendish thing had occurred. 2 tightened swaths of destruction stretched from the glen to the Fry farmyard. Monstrous prints covered the bare patches of ground, and one side of the old red barn had completely caved in. Of the cattle, only a quarter could be found and identified. Some of these were in curious fragments, and all that survived had to be shot. Earl Sawyer suggested that help be asked from Asselberry or Arkham, but others maintained that it would be of no use. Old Zebulon Whatley, of a branch that hovered about halfway between soundness and decadence, made a darkly wild suggestion about rites that ought to be practiced on the hilltops. He came of a line where the tradition ran strong, and his memories of chanting in the great stone circles were not altogether connected with Wilbur and his grandfather. Darkness fell upon a stricken countryside too passive to organize for real defense. In a few cases, closely related families would band together and watch in the gloom under one roof, but in general there was only a repetition of the barricading of the night before, and a futile, ineffective gesture of loading muskets and setting pitchforks handily about. Nothing, however, occurred, except some hill noises, and when the day came, there were many who hoped that the new horror had gone as swiftly as it had come. There were even bold souls who proposed an offensive expedition down in the glen, though they did not venture to set an actual example to the still reluctant majority. When the night came again, barricading was repeated, and there was less huddling of families together. In the morning, both the Fry and the Seth Bishop households reported excitement among the dogs and vague sounds and stenches from afar, while early explorers noted with horror a fresh set of the monstrous tracks in the road skirting Sentinel Hill. As before, the sides of the road shewed a bruising indicative of blasphemously stupendous bulk of the horror, whilst the conformation of the tracks seemed to argue a passage in 2 directions, as if a moving mountain had come from Cold Springs Glen and returned to it along the same path. At the base of the hill, a 30-foot swath of crushed shrubbery saplings led steeply upward, and the seekers gasped when they saw that even the most perpendicular places did not deflect the inexorable trail. Whatever the horror was, it could scale a sheer stony cliff of almost complete verticality, and as the investigators climbed around to the hill's summit by safer routes, they saw that the trail ended, or rather reversed, there. It was here that the Whatleys used to build their hellish fires and chant their hellish rituals by the table-like stone on May Eve and Hallowmas. Now that very stone formed the center of a vast space thrashed by the mountainous horror, whilst upon its slightly concave surface was a thick, fetid deposit of the same tarry stickiness observed on the floor of the ruined Watley farmhouse when the horror escaped. Men looked at one another and muttered. When they looked down, then they looked down the hill. Apparently, the horror had descended by a route much the same as that of its ascent. To speculate was futile. Reason, logic, and normal ideas of motivation stood confounded. Only Zebulon, who was not with the group, could have done justice to the situation or suggested a plausible explanation. Thursday night began much as the others, but ended less happily. The whippoorwills in the glen had screamed with such unusual persistence that many could not sleep, and about 3 a.m. the party telephones rang tremulously. Those who took down their receivers heard a fright-mad voice shriek out, "Help, oh my God!" And some thought a crashing sound followed by the breaking off of the exclamation. There was nothing more. No one dared do anything, and no one knew until morning whence the call came. And those who had heard it called everyone on the line and found that only the Frys did not reply. The truth appeared an hour later when a hastily assembled group of armed men trudged out to the Fry place at the head of the glen. It was horrible, yet hardly a surprise. There was more swaths and monstrous prints, but there was no longer any house. It had caved in like an eggshell, and amongst the ruins, nothing living or dead could be discovered, only stench and a tarry stickiness. The Elmer Frys had been erased from Dunwich. Okay, I'm actually going to give my voice a break here. We've got a bit left, and if we don't use it the whole night next week, I can always go into the next story, which is... Hold on. The Whisperer in the Darkness. But yeah, my voice is getting a little rough. But very interesting story, or at least so I think. I would think, considering the amount of Southern blood I have, I would be able to do that accent without fucking it up so bad. Apparently not. But it is what it is. I'm not sure what we're doing tomorrow night yet, but we'll be doing some. May just hang out, may play a game. Actually, I think there was a game I wanted to play. Could play more of the Cthulhu Saves Christmas. That's fun. Might do that. We'll see about it. Either way. Thank you guys very much for being here. I definitely gotta go drink some hot water or drink some tea and honey is what I need. But I'll see you guys tomorrow night. Have some sweet dreams and all that fun stuff. And yeah. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Suppose I should go to the end screen, huh? No, not that one. That one. Yay. Thank you, Sleazy. I appreciate you. Good night, guys.